I am Taylor Cotis. I'm a senior R&D Tax Credit consultant at Leyton. We recently started working with the Purdue Foundry, and we thought it would be, given that it's tax season, an appropriate time to talk about the R&D Tax Credit. So this is an incentive that is designed to encourage innovation in the U.S. For any companies that are incorporated. In Indiana, you also have a state credit that's available to you. So hopefully after this presentation is over, you will be able to realize whether or not this is a good fit for your business now. So jumping right into, is not working. There we go. All right, so what are we gonna cover today? So first of all, what is this tax credit? How can it actually potentially give my business some additional cash flow? What companies can claim? So is this industry specific, or do a lot of companies have an opportunity to claim? And then we'll also talk about how do you go about determining what is your R&D and what is your R&D investment. So that actually helps you figure out what your potential credit is that you could expect to receive. And then we'll go into how do you claim this credit and ensure you're doing it with long-term success in mind. So the first thing is there are two versions of this tax credit on the federal level. One is specifically designed for startups, and one is designed for any company of any age, of any size. So there's two different ways that you can benefit from the credit on a federal level. What's most important to know is the gist of how it works is you go and say, okay, I've got all these R&D activities. What are the costs that are tied to those activities? And ultimately what you'll do is you'll take a look at your R&D throughout each year. So it's kind of a holistic perspective that you'll take. And you can expect to receive somewhere between 7 and 10% of that total investment in R&D back. And the tax credit is dollar for dollar. So the first way that you can realize the credit is if you are a startup. What's most exciting about this is this credit didn't exist before 2015. So startups didn't really have a way to benefit. But when the government made this permanent, they took a step back and realized, well, I don't think we're really encouraging startups to claim because they're not going to be profitable businesses for a couple of years. But one of the first expenses that businesses will receive is, or one of the first expenses businesses will incur is they'll be hiring employees. You'll have to pay salaries, and then you'll have payroll tax liability. So this credit allows you to reduce your payroll tax liability on a quarterly basis until you completely used up your credit, and then you'll have to continue paying. You can claim this version of the R&D tax credit, which we'll call the payroll tax credit, for a maximum of 5 years. So what's really important to note is when did your business, or when will your business first incur gross receipts? Because that's what's going to push you into a 5-year claim window. What is also incredibly important to know is this is a tax credit. It is complicated, and there are nuances to it. So you might think you don't qualify when in reality you do. On the other hand, you think you could be a great company, a great fit for this credit when it actually might not. So it's always worth double checking and asking someone who has a little bit more experience in this particular tax incentive, because it's a good one and you definitely don't want to miss out if the business can benefit from it. The idea is, as a startup, your business will continue to grow. You'll exceed that 5-year window at some point, and you'll move into claiming the traditional R&D tax credit. So this one is a state and federal incentive, and it allows you to reduce income tax liability on a dollar for dollar basis. What this means is if you owe, and it's a similar thing with the payroll credit, if you owe $10,000 in taxes and you have a $7,000 tax credit, it's really easy math. Instead of paying $10,000, you do 10 minus 7 is 3, so you'll pay $3,000. This credit works a little bit differently than the payroll because you can claim not only for the current year, you can also claim the 3 years prior, and you'll be able to get a refund on overpaid historical tax liability. So you'll grow from claiming the payroll credit into claiming this credit on a state and federal level. If your business is incorporated somewhere other than Indiana, there are also credits in other states as well. What you'll generally see is the state credits mirror the federal credits. I mentioned that you'll get somewhere between a 7 to 10% R&D tax credit based on your total investment. And what we see is states are usually a little bit on the smaller side compared to the federal, but you can claim for expenses both on the state and federal level. So it's almost like a double benefit. So I think one of the most important things to note is being part of the Purdue Foundry, you're looking for resources, you're looking for funding, you're trying to grow your business. When you start looking for funding, these tax credits demonstrate to advisors, to VC firms, that you're paying attention to the nitty-gritty important tax stuff, which a lot of businesses won't pay attention to. It also lengthens the runway. So if you receive $100,000 from a VC firm, for example, or an angel investor, and you invest all of that in qualified R&D, you'll be able to say, you know, I can claim this tax credit, and instead of taking this $100,000 investment and only receiving $100,000 from it, you can turn it into $110,000. So it demonstrates really good fiscal responsibility, and it's something that investors would definitely want to see. So it's a good thing to keep in mind if you're pitching, to say that you are aware of this and you're being responsible with the money you receive. So who can claim? You're not really supposed to read this slide. It's just there to give you an idea that this credit is so broad, and we'll touch on how you figure out what R&D is in a minute, but so many industries qualify. People typically expect, you know, life science fields to be eligible, or medical device companies, and that is totally true. They are absolutely eligible and great candidates to claim. But the way the legislation is written, it's really industry inclusive. So whether you're developing software, you're doing something with aerospace engineering, you're working in construction, you're working with robotics, there's R&D across a really wide variety of industries. So even if you're not in an area that people traditionally think of as doing R&D, it is really important to just always look into it, because the likelihood is you probably are doing R&D to some extent. So once you know, okay, there's probably a good opportunity that you are eligible and you're probably doing R&D, how do you figure out what actually is? We do that through a 4-part test. So this is a really simplified explanation of how do you figure out what R&D is. If you have any questions on this for your specific industry, I'm more than happy to jump into it and we can talk through it. But the first part is you're developing a new or improved product, process, technique, formula, software, etc. What that means is you need to be doing something that's core to your business. How do you keep your doors open? Is it something new, or is it a product that you've had for a couple years and you're trying to make continuous improvements to it? So it's not just something brand new that you've never done before. It could be just improvements to what you already have out there. Another really important thing to note on this test is you don't need to be doing something that the world has never seen before. You don't need to be doing something that the US has never seen before and filing a ton of patents. As long as it's new or improving your business, then you're taking the first step towards doing qualified R&D. The second test is that it needs to be technological in nature. So you need to have some field of hard science or STEM underlying what you're doing. So what you'll see is engineering or software development or food science or chemistry. All of those are hard science principles. So if you're involved in creating a new or improved product or process, and you need some kind of special technical expertise, those are the first 2 areas that check the box that you're likely doing R&D. I'm going to show you the 3rd and 4th at the same time, because I think it's probably easier to understand them when they're combined in an explanation. So the 3rd is a process of experimentation, and the 4th is the elimination of uncertainty. So the reason why I think they're close and related is when you're starting a new project, there's a lot of unknowns at the beginning. You probably have an idea of what you're setting out to achieve, understand whether or not something is feasible. With all of those unknowns, you need to solve them to know, is this a realistic goal? Is this a realistic product release? Can we achieve what we want to? And so to eliminate the uncertainty behind that particular project, you're going to move through a process of experimentation. You're going to look at different alternatives or different approaches, and that's going to let you understand what is the best approach to this. How can I release this feature and functionality on my software platform? Or how can I improve my medical device that I'm going to release the second version of to the market next year? So as you move through this process of experimentation, you'll either get to a point where you say, I'm ready to release my new product or process to the market. I'm ready to serve my clients with it. At that point, when you know exactly what you've achieved and you're going to release it out, you're kind of ending your R&D process because you've eliminated the uncertainty behind that development. If what you originally set out to achieve you didn't succeed with, you're going to take it back to the drawing board and you're going to continue throughout that process of experimentation. What's important to note is sometimes your process of experimentation will never end. If you're releasing a new product, for example, there's going to be a lot of R&D at the very beginning, a lot of unknowns. But what you'll likely see, and this is maybe something you see in the software space a lot, is you'll do continuous improvements to it. So even if your R&D scales down, you'll still be trying to improve what you're doing. There's still going to be some uncertainty underlying it. So there's a chance that your R&D process never really ends. You're always involved in it to some extent. So what you do with this 4-part test is you compare it to your projects, all of the projects that you undertook throughout any given year. So given that it's 2020 now, you guys have probably started thinking about, okay, I need to wrap up everything I did in 2019, my financials, and if applicable, file your tax returns. So at that point, you say, okay, what activities throughout 2019 checked the box for all 4 of these tests? And you'll be able to say, okay, I've identified my R&D projects. To actually start calculating a credit, you need to know what costs you can include, what are eligible to claim for. So that's what we're going to dive into next. So the qualifying costs are a good number that you can look at. First, and one of the biggest ones, is salary. The way this works is you'll look at who is involved in R&D. So the people that are hands-on doing the R&D, they're the ones with the technical background. They'll definitely be involved. And you'll be able to say, okay, what percentage of time did you spend doing R&D throughout the year? Maybe you say, okay, someone spent 75% of their time doing R&D. You'll be able to take 75% of their salary and allocate that towards your R&D investment. The formal name for that is your qualified research expenditure. But you don't just get to look at the people who are doing the R&D. You can also look at the people supporting it and directly supervising it. So the people supporting it could maybe be project managers or product managers or lab assistants. They're not necessarily doing the R&D themselves, but they're helping facilitate it to ensure that it actually does occur. And then with the people directly supervising, that would be management, that could be executive leadership. So it's a lot of people that you can potentially look at as involved in the R&D process. What you'd expect to see is the people who are doing the R&D are going to have a high percentage of their time allocated to R&D throughout the year. People supporting and supervising, maybe a little bit less. The good news is, at a startup or a younger, smaller business, people will play a lot of roles. So your C-level executive leadership could be spending 80 or 90% of their time doing R&D. What's most important is there's a part of the legislation called the substantially all doctrine. And what that means is if you have someone spending 80% or more of their time doing R&D, you can capture up to 100% of their salary. So it gives you a little added bonus for having employees that are pretty much dedicating all of their time to R&D. The next group that you can look at is contracted research. So maybe you don't have a ton of W-2 employees yet, but you have a bunch of contractors that you work. They work in a pretty similar way that employees would. You'd allocate a percentage of time spent doing R&D throughout the year. But because they're not actually employees of the business, there's a little bit of a legal haircut that's taken. So even if someone spends 100% of their time doing R&D for you, if they're contracted, so maybe they have a 1099, at most you can claim for 65% of it. The logic behind this is the government wants you to stimulate the economy both across the US and locally, and it also wants you to hire more people. So you're still stimulating the economy by working with individuals or contracted groups, but hopefully you'll be hiring them as W-2 employees in the future. The third group that you can look at, or cost category that you can look at, is basic research. So this would be if you work with universities, federal labs, and some small businesses. When I say some small businesses, if you work in the energy sector, for example, rather than having to claim at 65%, you would be able to claim 100%. It's because the government wants to stimulate that particular industry more. So there's an added bonus. The next you can look at is raw materials and supplies. So when you're creating a product and you're using some kind of hardware, or maybe it's in the food space, or if you're creating like cosmetic products, all of the raw materials going into your R&D process, they're at potential risk. It could turn out to be on that batch you've created the best product, the one you want to release out to the market. But it could also be that you maybe have to throw it out, and all that money kind of goes to waste a little bit. So what the government lets you do is recapture some of that investment as well. So any raw materials or supplies that are consumed or used up during the R&D process, you can also recapture. For people operating within the software space, this particular cost category, computers externally leased for conducting research, has evolved a lot lately. Originally, it used to be, are you like spending time renting out a supercomputer? Now it's more along the lines of like Amazon Web Services, your development environment, or Azure. The big areas within software development would be your development environment, because that's where a lot of the R&D is occurring. It could also be in kind of like a testing or quality assurance environment as well. And then the last area is the legal fees associated with filing patents. So if you are one of those companies that's going out and filing patents, you'll be able to claim some of those costs back, which definitely add up. So across all of these cost categories, and what we just talked about prior to this slide, which was all of the projects, you'll be able to say, okay, this is the total investment I put into R&D in 2019. And you'll get, depending on the age of the business, the amount of R&D investment, somewhere between that 7 to 10% back. As younger companies, the likelihood is you'll sit closer to that 10% range. And the goal is you take those tax savings and you invest them back into the business. How can you continue innovating? How can you hire another person and get your product out to the market a little bit faster? So that is the goal of the credit. This is a permanent incentive now. So I think it's really important that as you're doing R&D, as you're hiring employees, trying to grow your business and get out to the market, it's something that you definitely keep in mind, as it can be a really good incentive for you to claim. As I mentioned before on one of the earlier slides, as a startup, you'll hopefully still have the opportunity to claim the payroll credit. As you grow out of that startup phase and transition into a profitable business, that's when you continue to claim the R&D tax credit, the traditional income tax relief. What's really important here is building it into your financial plans, starting to claim and keep track of information and use it as an additional source of cash flow each year. I know we've talked a very high level because the Purdue Foundry works with a lot of different industries, so we didn't dive into any in particular. But what's important is this is a little simplified. It's definitely tax code, so we kept it kind of high level and easy for everyone. So this slide, beyond this first bullet, we'll kind of start diving into some of the nuances of the credit, and you'll probably realize that it's maybe a little more complicated than this 8-slide PowerPoint might have alluded to. So if you claim this credit, what's incredibly important is understanding the legislation, understanding how your particular industry, how your business activities satisfy that 4-part test. You need to make sure that you're claiming properly. So if you claim it year after year, it's better to just get a correct process put in place the first time or within the first couple of years, instead of claiming it for 10 years and then realizing, oh man, I've been doing this wrong and I don't want to get in any trouble for that. The second advice is making sure that you calculate all base year periods correctly and treat all eligible expenses in accordance with regulations and case law. So what this means is there's a couple different ways of calculating your credit. For startups that maybe have only been around for a year or two, there's a method specifically designed for startups. As your company becomes a little bit more established, there are other credit calculation methods that let you look back to previous years. So if your business was founded in 2016 and you're looking at claiming a credit for 2019, you'll start saying, okay, what R&D investment did I put in 2016, in 2017, and in 2018? And that'll ultimately factor into what your R&D credit is in 2019. So making sure that you look at all the possible credit calculation methods and you pick the one that makes the most sense for your business. That's really important. And then as you go through claiming each year moving forward, treating projects and costs the same across each year will be really important to building up a strong claim. The fourth piece of advice is starting to track the information in real time. So there's going to be relevant financial information, and that would be the W-2s, the salaries, or your raw material costs, and then R&D information. So what were the challenges within each project? When you think you come across either R&D expenses or R&D activities, finding a way to just flag those throughout the year is going to make sitting down at the beginning of the following year and starting to run through all of those R&D activities so you can actually calculate your credit. It's going to make it a lot easier and a lot more streamlined. So starting to track this information in real time is going to make your lives a lot easier. And as you continue claiming year after year, you'll know what to look for, so the process will become more streamlined for you. And then the final piece of advice is make sure that you have documentation that supports this claim. What's really important is being able to support your claim if an audit were to occur. Unfortunately, this is the world of taxes. So the IRS can come knocking, or the state government can come knocking and say, hey, I want to understand how you calculated this credit. What was the logic behind it? How did you qualify those projects? And the best way to ensure that they go, wow, you've done a great job, is to have documentation that is there to support your claim. So with that, there's no set documentation that you need to have. Because this credit spans so many industries, a software company is going to keep track of R&D projects a lot. Well, I'm assuming in a very different method than a life science company or a brewery or a distillery. So across all those industries, the IRS couldn't really create any set documentation that everyone would need to produce. So you can use your ordinary business documentation to support your claim. When I start talking about a substantiated report, when you work with people that specialize, or I guess groups that specialize in this tax credit, one thing that you'll often see provided is a report that walks through how you qualified all of your projects, how you drew parallels between each project, and all of the costs that you included to actually build up your R&D investment. And the report will state how the 4-part test is passed, how costs are tied back to each R&D project, what credit calculation method you used, and it basically spells it out. So if there are ever any questions on your claim, that is designed to answer questions right off the bat that the IRS or the state government would be asking. So it shows that you really took the time to learn the legislation or familiarize yourself with it, that you put effort into calculating it correctly, and hopefully with all of that support, the IRS will say, or the state government will say, you've done an awesome job, you've claimed correctly, and there's no room for us to reduce your credit. So hopefully that was helpful information to give you guys an idea that no matter what industry you're in, you're probably doing R&D to some extent. There's costs, there's money sitting out there that you can claim, and it's worth looking into and understanding when the optimal time is to claim the credit. I know someone just raised their hand, so I will get to you, and I can open up the floor for questions and make sure you guys can ask and fully understand everything. One last thing I want to touch on is who are we and why am I talking about this today? Leyton is an R&D tax credit specialist. So day in and day out, this is all we focus on. On the slide, you can see that we have offices in a ton of countries. So a lot of countries offer an incentive like this. The US credit just became permanent. So honestly, the US is a little bit behind the game compared to other countries. But the incentive is only getting better with all the legislation that's being proposed and continuing to be passed. This incentive is a really good one to look into for your business. What makes us a little different than a CPA that you might work with is we also have technical expertise. So we bring in people that have industry-specific backgrounds that can help answer, yes, this project qualifies, or no, it doesn't, here's why. It should make the whole claim process a little bit easier on your side. I can now go in and try to open up the Q&A. If you guys have any questions, would you like to, let's see, I can allow everybody to talk, so please keep in mind, let's see, there's a chat. Chat. Okay, is this something you file with your taxes or is it filed separately? Okay, good question. So this is something you file in your taxes. There is a form, it's the 6765 form, and it would go into your tax return. So when I mentioned that this is tax season, a lot of you guys are probably starting to think about when you're trying to file. Are you doing it March or April 15th, or are you going to do it with an extension? You probably want to align having an R&D study done with when you're going to file. And you probably want to finish an R&D study maybe 2 weeks before you're filing, the ideal filing deadline, whether it's upon the 15th or it's a couple weeks before. As soon as you guys file your taxes, you'll either, if you're expecting to receive a refund because your business is profitable, you will maybe expect to see that within 90 to 120 days. If you're realizing or claiming the payroll tax credit, you'll start realizing it in the quarter after you file. So easy example is you are an LLC or an S Corp and you're filing March 15th. So it's coming up pretty quick. You'll file your return in Q1 of 2020. So as soon as Q2 comes around, you'll be able to start reducing your payroll tax liability. You'll continue reducing your payroll tax liability each quarter until you've used up your entire credit. Assuming you're eligible to claim the credit the following year, so for 2020, you'll be able to basically top up that value and continue reducing your payroll tax liability. Does that answer your question? Are there any follow-up questions? So the startup version of the credit is only available on the federal level. Once you've hit profitability and you have an income tax liability, that's when you'd be able to benefit from most state credits, depending on where you're incorporated. The startup credit is newer. That one was only created at the very end of 2015. So states haven't adopted a program that mirrors that quite yet. The traditional R&D tax credit has been around since 1981. So when states have created a credit, then that's what they've generally followed. And yeah, so within the 6765, there's a box that you would check that would say, I'm making an election into the payroll credit. There are a couple additional forms and a little bit of extra work depending on who manages your payroll. If you work with like a third-party payroll company, there's some forms that you would have to file there as well to make sure that you actually realize it. But generally speaking, any kind of payroll company is really well prepared to help. And if you do work with a specialist, then we'd be able to liaise directly with your payroll provider to make sure you guys actually realize the benefit. Any other questions on potential R&D projects, realizing the credit, making sure you're claiming correctly?
Hi, Taylor. This is Angela. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you, Angela.
Great. All right. I just wanted to thank you again for putting on this webinar for our clients, and to all of the clients on the call, just thank you for attending. We were referred to Leyton by 2 clients that have worked with them before, so I hope you found it informative. And Taylor, I guess my main question for you at this point is kind of what are next steps if anyone was interested in learning more?
So my email is obviously on this PowerPoint slide. I have everyone that has registered, so I've recorded this presentation and I can send out the PowerPoint as well, so I can get that out to everyone by end of day today. If you think this might be a good fit, and I see someone also asked about what are the costs associated with your services, so I'll kind of get this into, I'll give a long answer to answer all of these questions. If it's your first time claiming, the biggest priority for us is to understand, well, first to confirm, are you actually doing R&D? Are you eligible to benefit from this credit? And then the second part is understanding what your credit potential is. So we'll do that with our tax and technical teams, and we'll say, okay, yes, you're eligible to claim. Here's a credit range that you can expect to receive. If we say you're not eligible to claim, there's no cost associated with having an assessment and sitting down and walking through your business. What we want to do is encourage people to look at this. Because it only became a permanent incentive a couple years ago, it has really flown under the radar, and a lot of businesses don't even know it exists. So it's a big education piece, and if we charged upfront fees to say you're not eligible, no one would want to do this. To answer the what cost is this, or what would this cost to work with someone like us? If we say, yes, you're eligible, there's good credit sitting on the table, our fee is just 25% of the credit you get. For startups, we structure it in a way to ensure that you guys are cash positive. So rather than having to pay us before you've actually realized the credit, it's structured so that you remain cash positive. And you actually start realizing the credit before you have to pay our full fee. By doing 25% of the credit identified, this ensures you'll always receive the vast majority of the credit. There's never any concern that we're going to be more expensive than what you receive, which you kind of run the risk of if you do an hourly rate or a fixed fee. What we typically see is startups or smaller businesses, it's usually a pretty streamlined claim process. Our goal is to make it so you guys can continue focusing on your business operations as much as possible. And we do all the heavy lifting to identify the R&D and calculate your credit and so on. And most importantly, probably is write a report that supports your claim. We'd say the safe answer is maybe it takes 2 to 3 weeks on our side to get everything wrapped up from start to finish, but it should only take a couple hours on your side. It depends, and I'm going to throw this back on everyone. It depends on how much information you guys have easily available to send over to us versus how much time we're going to have to spend speaking with people. The more information you have, the easier it'll be for us to get everything wrapped up and not take too much of your time away from day-to-day operations. So then Angela asked a question, how large are credits? And so this is a hard one to answer. Everyone always wants to know, what kind of credit am I looking at? It is so dependent on your business. You can look at a startup that's been around for 3 years and they've just invested a ton in R&D, and they'll look at maybe maxing out the payroll credit. So they could hit $2.5 million invested in R&D and they'd get a $250,000 payroll tax credit. You can also look at maybe in that same industry, the largest competitor making millions and millions and millions a year, and they could get a significantly smaller R&D tax credit. So it depends on how much you're investing. We've seen startups getting anywhere from like low $5,000-ish, like so low thousands, to some that hit above 100,000 easily. It is so dependent on what your investment is. It's a little bit challenging to give an estimate or give a range. What I will say is, going back to what kind of costs are associated with our service, our fee is definitely tailored to what your credit potential is. So if you're looking at $100,000 or $200,000, you would not be 25% of the credit identified. So it's something that we'll sit down and work with you through and be able to start estimating to make sure that it's the cost of working with us is appropriate and makes sense given your expected credit and how much activity or information you have on hand for us to work through. Are there any other questions? You can type them in the Q&A. Let's see if there's any in the chat box. All right. Is the patent legal fee related to licensed technology? Okay, so to answer okay, so let's go up to this top one. So you haven't applied for this credit in the 3 years that you've been around, but you want to apply. Do you get to apply retroactively? So the answer is yes and no. If you think the payroll tax credit, so the startup one, is the credit that'll benefit your business now, that credit does not allow you to look backwards. You can only claim it in your current tax year, which would likely be 2019. If you guys are profitable or nearing profitability, the traditional R&D tax credit allows you to look backwards. So you can claim for 2016, 17, 18, and 19. So it's a little bit of a game you have to play. If you're expecting to be profitable soon, does it make sense to claim retroactively? Or does it just make sense to claim the payroll tax credit now for 2019 and continue claiming that? What's important to know is what pushes you into that 5-year window for claiming is when you first incurred gross receipts. So even if your business has been around for 3 years, you might not have entered into that 5-year window threshold. Maybe not in your first year, but maybe you did in your second year of operation. So you likely have, just from seeing the 3 years, you probably have 2019, 2020, 2021 left to claim, but you could potentially have an additional year or two. It looks at when you first incurred gross receipts. And now for this question, is the patent legal fee related to licensed technology considered part of the R&D credit? If you are using licensed technology, that would probably not be something you can claim. There's no R&D or financial risk there. If you are licensing technology and also filing a patent for it, I would say it's all worth looking into. I can have one of our tax attorneys reach out and talk about your specific situation just to make sure that they give you the most comprehensive answer. Usually what we'll see is going through all the proceedings, writing all of the information that you need to actually successfully file a patent, the time spent doing that, the costs associated with filing. I've never been asked about licensing technology before or licensed technology. I'm going to lean probably towards no, unless you're actually developing that technology and then licensing it out to other people. Are there any other questions? You can see there's multiple areas to ask Q&A, so we've answered that one. And so I can dismiss that and dismiss that one. Any other questions? No? All right, if there's no more questions, I can let everyone get back to their afternoons, and then I can follow up with this webinar and the recording of it so that you guys can reference back to it. And then, anyone that wasn't able to listen or wasn't able to join today, we can also, they'll also get access to this as well. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'll stop the recording and end the webinar. Thank you guys for joining. Hopefully you found it to be informative and a good source of cash flow that you guys can implement into your business.
Great. Thanks again, Taylor. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. Cheers.
Bye.